A Living Fear. Chapter 1. The Nightmare Begins. Ella Carter had always been a rational person, grounded in reality and skeptical of the supernatural. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, worked as a software engineer, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of life. Her days were filled with the hum of her laptop, the comforting routine of her job, and the occasional evening out with friends. She had always prided herself on her logical mind and her ability to find solutions to even the most complex problems. However, her world was about to be turned upside down in a way she could never have imagined. It started with a recurring nightmare. Every night, Ella would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, as she dreamt of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure was always the same, tall, faceless, and radiating an aura of pure terror. She would try to scream, but no sound would come out. The figure would then slowly dissolve into the darkness, leaving her alone in her fear. Ella tried everything to shake off the nightmares. She changed her sleeping habits, consulted a therapist, and even resorted to sleeping pills. But the figure persisted, haunting her every night. She began to dread going to bed, knowing that the shadowy figure awaited her in her dreams. The first time it happened, Ella had brushed it off as a one-time occurrence, a result of a stressful day at work. She had been working on a particularly challenging project, and her mind was filled with algorithms and code. She thought that perhaps her brain was just processing the day's stress in her dreams. But when the nightmare returned the next night, and the night after that, she began to worry. Ella's first attempt at finding a solution was to change her sleeping environment. She rearranged her bedroom, moved her bed to a different wall, and even bought new bedding. She hoped that a change in scenery would disrupt the pattern of her nightmares. But the figure returned, standing in the same spot relative to her bed, its faceless gaze fixed on her. Next, Ella turned to her diet and daily routine. She cut out caffeine, avoided screens before bedtime, and established a relaxing bedtime routine. She read books instead of scrolling through her phone, took warm baths, and practiced meditation. But the figure persisted, haunting her every night. Desperate for a solution, Ella turned to a therapist. She described her nightmares in detail, hoping that talking about them would somehow diminish their power. The therapist suggested that the figure might be a manifestation of Ella's subconscious fears or anxieties. They explored her past, her relationships, and her work life, searching for any hidden stressors that might be causing the nightmares. But despite their efforts, the figure continued to haunt Ella's dreams. As the nights turned into weeks, Ella's fear began to seep into her waking life. She found herself jumping at shadows, her heart racing at the slightest noise. She started to avoid being alone at her house, inviting friends over or spending nights at her sister's place. She even considered moving, hoping that a change of location would leave the figure behind. But the figure followed her, appearing in her dreams no matter where she slept. Ella began to feel like a prisoner in her own mind, trapped in a cycle of fear and exhaustion. She dreaded the thought of going to bed, knowing that the figure awaited her in her dreams. She started to rely on sleeping pills, hoping that they would grant her a night of uninterrupted sleep. But the figure always found a way to break through the chemical-induced haze, standing at the foot of her bed, its faceless gaze fixed on her. Ella's friends and family began to notice the changes in her. She was constantly tired, her eyes shadowed with dark circles. She was jumpy and irritable, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a constant state of anxiety. They urged her to see a doctor, fearing that her nightmares were a symptom of a deeper issue. Ella reluctantly agreed, hoping that perhaps there was a medical explanation for her nightmares. She underwent a series of tests, but the results were all normal. The doctor suggested that her nightmares might be a result of stress and prescribed her medication to help her sleep. But Ella knew that the figure was more than just a product of her stress. It was real, and it was haunting her. As the days turned into weeks, Ella began to feel like she was losing her grip on reality. She started to question her own sanity, wondering if the figure was a product of her imagination. She kept a dream journal, documenting every detail of her nightmares, hoping to find a pattern or a clue that would help her understand what was happening. But the figure remained a mystery, its purpose and origin unknown. Ella felt like she was being taunted, like the figure was playing a cruel game with her. She started to research the supernatural, reading about ghosts, demons, and otherworldly entities. She wondered if the figure was a ghost, a remnant of a past life, or something else entirely. Ella's desperation grew with each passing night. She felt like she was being consumed by her fear, like the figure was slowly taking over her life. She started to withdraw from her friends and family, isolating herself in her fear. She felt like no one understood what she was going through, like she was alone in her struggle. But despite her fear, Ella refused to give up. She was determined to find a way to banish the figure from her dreams, to reclaim her life and her sanity. She knew that she couldn't keep living in fear, that she had to find a way to fight back. And so, she began to prepare herself for the battle ahead, arming herself with knowledge and courage. She was ready to face the figure, ready to confront her fear head-on. Little did she know, her journey was just beginning, and the truth behind the figure was more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 2. The Line Between Dreams and Reality. One night, Ella decided to confront her fear head-on. She stayed awake, determined to face the figure if it appeared. As the clock struck midnight, she felt a chill run down her spine. The room grew colder, and the air became thick with an eerie presence. She gripped the edges of her blanket, her knuckles turning white. Suddenly, the figure materialized at the foot of her bed, just like in her dreams. But this time, Ella was awake. She stared at the shadowy form, her breath caught in her throat. The figure stood motionless, its faceless gaze fixed on her. Ella summoned all her courage and whispered, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure did not respond, but it seemed to flicker, as if struggling to maintain its form. Ella reached out a trembling hand, and to her shock, her fingers passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. In that moment, she realized that her nightmare had crossed the line into reality. Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The figure seemed to beckon her, its form wavering like a candle flame in the wind. She felt an inexplicable pull, a sense that this apparition held answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask. With a deep breath, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up, her eyes never leaving the shadowy form. As she took a tentative step forward, the figure began to move, gliding silently towards the door. Ella followed, her curiosity overriding her fear. The house was silent, the only sound the soft padding of her feet on the wooden floor. The figure led her down the hallway, past the familiar portraits and knickknacks that now seemed alien in the dim light. They descended the stairs, the figure always a few steps ahead, its form casting no shadow in the moonlight filtering through the windows. Ella's mind raced with possibilities. Was this a ghost? A manifestation of her own fears? Or something else entirely? The figure paused at the front door, turning to face Ella. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The thought of stepping out into the night, following this spectral guide, sent a shiver down her spine. But she knew she had to see this through, to understand what was happening. With a determined nod, she opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The figure moved swiftly now, leading her down the path and into the woods that bordered her property. Ella hurried to keep up, the branches snagging her nightgown as she rushed past. The woods were dense, the canopy above blocking out most of the moonlight. Ella relied on the faint glow of the figure ahead to guide her. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure finally came to a stop in a small clearing, turning to face her once more. Ella approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the area. The clearing was familiar, a place she had played in as a child. But now, it held an air of mystery, as if the very trees were watching, waiting. The figure stood at the center of the clearing, its form flickering more rapidly now. Please, Ella whispered, her voice barely audible. Tell me what you want. Why are you here? The figure seemed to shimmer, and for a moment, Ella thought she saw a face within the shadows. A face that was somehow familiar, yet alien at the same time. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving Ella alone in the clearing. She stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The night was silent, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the woods around her. There was no sign of the figure, no hint that it had ever been there. With a sigh, Ella made her way back to the house, her mind a whirl of questions. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Sleep came slowly, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and whispered secrets. As dawn broke, Ella awoke with a start, the events of the night before playing vividly in her mind. She knew she couldn't ignore what had happened, couldn't pretend it was just a dream. The figure had been real, and it had led her to the clearing for a reason. Determined to uncover the truth, Ella resolved to return to the clearing, to search for any clues that might explain the figure's appearance. She dressed quickly, her mind already racing with possibilities. As she stepped out into the morning light, she felt a sense of purpose, a drive to understand the mysterious events that had unfolded. The woods were different in the daylight, the shadows less menacing, the paths more familiar. Ella made her way to the clearing, her eyes scanning the ground for any sign of what had happened the night before. She searched the area thoroughly, her heart sinking as she found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to give up, her eye caught a glint of something shiny half buried in the dirt. She knelt down, brushing away the soil to reveal a small, tarnished locket. With a trembling hand, she picked it up, her fingers tracing the intricate pattern on the surface. As she opened the locket, she gasped in surprise. Inside was a tiny portrait, a face that was eerily familiar. It was the face she had seen in the figure the night before, the face that had haunted her dreams. But who was it? And why had the figure led her to this locket? Ella knew she had to find out more, to uncover the secrets hidden within the locket. She tucked it safely into her pocket, her mind already formulating a plan. She would return to the house, search through the old family albums, and see if she could find a match for the face in the portrait. As she made her way back, she felt a sense of determination, a resolve to uncover the truth no matter what it took. The line between dreams and reality had blurred, and Ella was determined to find out why. Chapter 3: Unraveling the Mystery. Ella knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She confided in her best friend, Sarah, who was equally shocked and concerned. Together, they decided to delve into Ella's past, searching for any clues that might explain the figure's appearance. They discovered that Ella's childhood home, where she had lived until she was 10, had a dark history. The previous owners had reported strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. The house had been abandoned for years before Ella's family moved in. Could the figure be connected to that house? Ella and Sarah returned to the old house, now dilapidated and overgrown with weeds. As they stepped inside, Ella felt a familiar chill. The figure appeared before them, more solid than ever. Sarah gasped, but Ella stood her ground. "Why are you haunting me?" she demanded. The figure seemed to hesitate, then slowly raised an arm, pointing towards the attic. Ella and Sarah exchanged a glance, then made their way upstairs, the figure following close behind. The stairs creaked under their weight, each step echoing through the empty house. The air grew colder as they ascended, the figure's presence a tangible force behind them. Ella's heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. They reached the attic door, the wood warped and faded with age. Ella turned the knob, the hinges groaning in protest as the door swung open. The attic was dimly lit, the only light filtering through a small, dusty window. The room was filled with old furniture and boxes, the remnants of a lifelong past. Ella stepped inside, her eyes scanning the cluttered space. The figure moved past her, gliding towards a corner piled high with boxes. It stopped, turning to face Ella, its form flickering slightly. Ella approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the figure. As she reached the boxes, the figure vanished, leaving behind a faint, shimmering light. Ella knelt down, her hands trembling as she began to sort through the dusty contents. Sarah joined her, their breaths visible in the cold air. They found old photographs, yellowed with age, and letters tied with faded ribbons. Ella opened one of the letters, her eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. It was a love letter, dated over a century ago, signed by a man named Samuel. The recipient was a woman named Elizabeth. Ella's heart skipped a beat as she realized the significance. Elizabeth was her great-grandmother, a woman she had only heard stories about. She had lived in this very house, her life filled with love and tragedy. Could the figure be connected to her? Ella and Sarah continued their search, uncovering more letters and photographs. They found a diary, the pages filled with Elizabeth's thoughts and dreams. As they read, they began to piece together a story of forbidden love and heartbreaking loss. Samuel and Elizabeth had been deeply in love, but their families had disapproved. They had been forced to keep their relationship a secret, communicating through letters and stolen moments. But tragedy had struck, tearing them apart forever. Ella felt a deep connection to Elizabeth, her heart aching for the love that had been lost. She turned to Sarah, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to find out what happened to them," she said. "This is the key to understanding the figure." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "We'll do whatever it takes," she agreed. "Let's start by talking to your family. Maybe they know more about Elizabeth and Samuel." Ella and Sarah spent the rest of the day poring over the letters and diary, their minds racing with questions. As the sun began to set, they packed up the boxes, determined to take them home and continue their research. As they left the attic, Ella felt a sense of closure, as if the figure had finally found peace. But she knew their journey was far from over. They had uncovered a piece of the puzzle, but the full picture was still hidden in the shadows of the past. Over the next few days, Ella and Sarah delved deeper into the history of Elizabeth and Samuel. They visited the local library, searching through old newspapers and records. They found more letters, hidden away in the archives, each one revealing another piece of the story. They discovered that Samuel had been a soldier, sent away to fight in a distant war. Elizabeth had waited for him, her heart filled with hope and longing. But he had never returned, his fate unknown. Elizabeth had been devastated, her heart broken beyond repair. Ella felt a deep sadness as she read the final letters, the words filled with despair and loss. She couldn't help but wonder if the figure was Samuel, his spirit unable to rest until the truth was uncovered. Determined to find out more, Ella and Sarah decided to visit the local cemetery, searching for any graves that might belong to Samuel or Elizabeth. They wandered through the rows of headstones, their eyes scanning the names and dates. Finally, they found what they were looking for: a small, weathered headstone, the inscription barely legible. It read, Samuel Thompson, beloved son and soldier, lost but never forgotten. Beside it was another headstone, the name Elizabeth carved into the stone. Ella knelt down, her fingers tracing the letters. She felt a deep connection to these two people, their love story echoing through the generations. As she stood up, she felt a gentle breeze, as if the spirits of Samuel and Elizabeth were finally at peace. With a sense of closure, Ella and Sarah returned home, their minds filled with the story they had uncovered. They knew they would never forget the love of Samuel and Elizabeth, their spirits forever entwined in the shadows of the past. But as they settled into their routine, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The figure had led her to the attic, to the letters and diary. But what did it want her to do with this knowledge? Was there more to uncover? More secrets hidden in the shadows? Ella knew she couldn't rest until she had all the answers. She was determined to honor the memory of Samuel and Elizabeth, to ensure their love story was never forgotten. And so, with Sarah by her side, she continued her quest, delving deeper into the mystery that had changed her life forever. Chapter 4. The Truth Unveiled. In the attic, they found a hidden compartment in the wall, containing an old diary. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. It belonged to a young girl named Emily, who had lived in the house decades ago. The entries described her fear of a shadowy figure that haunted her dreams and eventually drove her to madness. Ella realized that the figure was not a malevolent spirit, but a manifestation of Emily's unresolved fear and pain. The figure had latched onto Ella, sensing her empathy and strength. With newfound understanding, Ella turned to the figure and said, Emily, I know your story now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. It's time to let go. The figure flickered, then slowly dissolved into the air, leaving behind a sense of peace. Ella felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and she knew that the nightmares were finally over. From that day forward, Ella embraced her newfound connection to the supernatural, using her experiences to help others overcome their fears. She learned that sometimes, the line between dreams and reality can blur, and that facing our fears can lead to unexpected discoveries. Ella and Sarah spent hours poring over Emily's diary, each entry revealing more about the girl's tormented life. Emily had been a bright and imaginative child, but her vivid dreams had often blurred the line between reality and fantasy. The figure had first appeared in her dreams, a shadowy presence that filled her with dread. Over time, the figure had begun to manifest in her waking life, driving her to the brink of madness. Ella felt a deep empathy for Emily, her heart aching for the girl's suffering. She understood now that the figure had been a cry for help, a manifestation of Emily's unresolved fears and pain. By uncovering Emily's story and acknowledging her suffering, Ella had given the spirit the peace it needed to finally let go. With the figure gone, Ella found a new sense of purpose. She began to research the supernatural, delving into books and articles about ghosts, spirits, and the unexplained. She discovered that she had a natural affinity for sensing spiritual energies, a gift that allowed her to see and communicate with the other side. Ella started small, offering her help to friends and family who were experiencing unexplained phenomena. She approached each case with an open mind and a compassionate heart, using her empathy and intuition to guide her. Word of her abilities spread, and soon she was receiving requests from strangers, desperate for her help. One of her first cases involved a young boy named Timothy, who was being tormented by a malevolent spirit in his home. Ella spent hours with the boy, listening to his fears and reassuring him that he was not alone. She performed a cleansing ritual, using sage and crystals to purify the space and drive out the negative energy. As she worked, she felt a deep connection to the spirit world, her senses heightened, and her intuition guiding her every move. She could see the spirit, a dark and twisted form that fed on fear and negativity. With a calm and steady voice, she commanded it to leave, her words filled with authority and power. The spirit resisted at first, its form writhing and contorting as it fought against her will. But Alice stood her ground, her resolve unwavering. Slowly, the spirit began to fade, its hold on the physical world weakening until it finally vanished, leaving behind a sense of peace and tranquility. Timothy's parents were overjoyed, their gratitude evident in their tear-filled eyes. They thanked Ella profusely, praising her courage and compassion. Ella accepted their thanks with humility, knowing that she was merely a vessel for a greater power, a conduit for the light that could drive out the darkness. As Ella's reputation grew, so did the complexity of the cases she encountered. She found herself facing spirits that were not so easily vanquished, entities that required more than just sage and crystals to be driven out. She began to study ancient rituals and incantations, delving into the arcane and the mystical in her quest to help those in need. One such case involved a historic mansion on the outskirts of town, a place long rumored to be haunted. The current owners had purchased the property with the intention of restoring it to its former glory, but their plans had been thwarted by a series of unexplained accidents and strange occurrences. Ella arrived at the mansion, her senses immediately overwhelmed by the sheer volume of spiritual energy that permeated the air. She could feel the presence of multiple entities, their energies intertwined and chaotic. She knew that this would be a challenge unlike any she had faced before. She spent days exploring the mansion, mapping out the hotspots of spiritual activity and documenting her findings. She discovered that the mansion had a dark and bloody history, a legacy of violence and betrayal that had left its mark on the very fabric of the building. Ella performed a series of rituals, using ancient incantations and powerful artifacts to cleanse the space and drive out the negative energies. She faced resistance at every turn, the spirits fighting back with a ferocity that left her physically and emotionally drained. But Ella refused to give up. She knew that she was the only one who could help these tormented souls find peace, the only one who could break the cycle of violence and pain that had plagued the mansion for centuries. With each spirit she vanquished, she felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. She knew that she was making a difference, that her gift was a blessing that allowed her to help others in a way that few could. As Ella's journey continued, she found herself drawn to the stories of those she helped. She began to document her experiences, recording the tales of the tormented souls she encountered and the peace she helped them find. She hoped that her words would serve as a beacon of hope for those who were suffering, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a light to guide them through. Ella's work took her to places she never imagined, from the bustling streets of the city to the quiet solitude of the countryside. She encountered spirits from all walks of life, each with their own unique story to tell. She listened to their tales of love and loss, of joy and sorrow, and she helped them find the peace they so desperately sought. Through it all, Ella remained grounded and humble, never forgetting the lessons she had learned from Emily's diary. She knew that the line between dreams and reality could be blurred, that the supernatural was not always as it seemed. She approached each case with an open mind and a compassionate heart, using her empathy and intuition to guide her. As Ella's journey continued, she found herself drawn to the stories of those she helped. She began to document her experiences, recording the tales of the tormented souls she encountered and the peace she helped them find. She hoped that her words would serve as a beacon of hope for those who were suffering, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a light to guide them through. Ella's connection to the supernatural had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. She had faced her fears and emerged stronger, her spirit tempered by the trials she had endured. She had learned that the line between dreams and reality could be blurred, that the supernatural was not always as it seemed. But most importantly, she had learned that facing our fears could lead to unexpected discoveries, that even in the darkest of times, there was always a light to guide us through. And so, with a heart full of courage and a spirit unyielding, Ella continued her journey, a beacon of hope and light in a world shrouded in darkness.